Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Shawn Powell, President of Eastern New Mexico University, Roswell. This afternoon, Romo Villegas is joining us for a conversation on violence and violence prevention. Mr. Villegas is a criminal justice instructor here at the campus. He is a tenured faculty member. He's also the Faculty Senate President at the current time and is moving into the director of our Garrett position. Mr. Villegas brings a specific set of points and knowledge to this conversation due to his background in probation and parole. And I'm sure as we go through our discussions, he'll talk about some of those things. So, Mr. Villegas, thank you again for joining us this afternoon for this conversation. It's something that's happening in the country. You and I have talked about it informally a little bit, and this is an opportunity for us to put some thoughts to a broader audience regarding the conversation on violence and maybe some violence prevention measures that we can put forward. I looked today at the Gun Violence Archives, which is an online service, and it was talking about the number of mass shootings in the United States. And looking over the years, that number has gone up in terms of mass shootings. And we had a recent incident, obviously yesterday. We're filming this on May 25th. So yesterday there was the shooting at Ross Elementary School in Texas. And so that's something that is on everyone's minds right now. But in 2021, there were 692 mass shootings in the United States. So if we just think about that number, and that's been a climbing number, are there any thoughts you have when you hear that number?
I think it's hard to process that when you're in the situation, especially not from cities that have those huge mass shootings there. We had our own incident that happened here in Roswell, the Berendo Middle School that was shooting here in about 2014, if I remember correctly. And so we feel how it permeates through the community. So I think the problem that we've had in the past is trying to fix the problem without trying to address the beginning of the process. And so the problem is those are very difficult things to at least to diagnose those issues at the beginning, because we're talking about people, specifically kids. There was such a difficult situation at the time. They have their biology issues that are going on, and their being in high school is very difficult as well. We have bullying and those issues of violence. So we know that they exist. The question is, it's how do we approach to fixing the problem at the very beginning, and it becomes a little bit more difficult. And so until we figure out the way to move that way, we're just going to be responding to the issues that we're having in our country.
And that's something that's been evident over the last few years, especially as these numbers of mass shootings have increased. Looking at the data so far in May of 2022, we've had 49 mass shootings in the United States. And some of those are more well-known than others. Obviously, the one at Ross Elementary that we've been talking about. There was also the event at Buffalo, New York at a shopping mall, the one in Houston, Texas at a flea market, and then at a church in Laguna Woods, California. It seems like each of those had some element that we could reflect on and say, this is why this person did this. And I think when you talk about adolescence or youth still in development, there's probably some biological rationale for that. There could be some psychological reasons and also some social pressures that they're experiencing.
Sure. At their age, there's so many things that are happening with these children, and it's hard for us to figure out how we're going to find a way to move on to intervene at a young age. And to offer these resources for our kids to be able to deal with what they're dealing with at that age. And we can tell you that socially and culturally, it's very difficult to put your finger on one thing, because I have a whole list of things that are happening in this child's life. And so the question, how do they get to that point where they actually feel that they don't have any other resources? I can tell you that the statistics will suggest that 7% of those shooters are 18 years of age and younger. And so they're dealing with in their lives. So how do we, as a system, as a city, as a community, how do we offer the resources and open up that communication with our kids so they will tell us the issues that they're having, so we can intervene at that time and offer those either professionally or as parents, as clergy, or other resources that we have in this society. So, but yes, absolutely, there's lots of statistics that will suggest that these kids are a certain amount of, there's so many issues in their lives that it's hard for them to put a finger on it, and so much less us who are trying to move in and intervene.
I think one of the things you're mentioning is there's probably more than one cause or more than one reason why someone commits a mass shooting. Whether, again, it could be their age, it could be past experiences with bullies, it could be poor family situations. There's lots of different things that could be going on in terms of that. To bring it closer to home here in Roswell, we did have 2 youth who were shot and killed last month in a park here in Roswell.
We did, and those boys were, I believe, 15 and 16 respectively when they happened. So they were local kids at Roswell High. They weren't into anything else that's happening in Roswell that was different, that they're kind of dealing with on a day-to-day basis in regular high school. So the question is, how do we offer those resources so we can change that mindset at that time for these children? And I think we failed fairly miserably in the past because we're not diagnosing or the response as opposed to taking care of our kids at the beginning. And so I think with all those things that you're talking about that these kids are dealing with at the time, it's not just 1 or 2, it could be 15 or 20 or all of these issues. And so when they combine on and they impact a child, then they're more likely to act out in that way. And so I think we just need to find a way to offer more resources so they feel safe, so they can actually talk with their issues that they might be having.
And when you talk about offering more resources, are you thinking in terms of mental health services, educational services? Are there certain things you have in mind that you think might be beneficial for a society or a community to help reduce some of the violence that's occurring?
The answer is yes. We need to find out exactly how can we, whatever we can offer. Mental health, obviously, that's an issue that we're having. We have some issues in domestic violence in our cities, in our communities here, so that's an issue as well. Maybe the bullying is still the leading cause of school violence. Bullying is part of that, so we've been working on that for 5 to 10 years, and so we haven't really made any headway in that because the statistics would suggest that we're still moving that forward. We're not getting any better at it. So yes, the outside resources, like we mentioned stuff like the mental health resources that we have for kids, but then we have to worry about the stigma that's associated with mental health issues. So they're contending with a lot, and so again, we need to be a little more creatively on how to offer those resources and trying to not be more of the problem as opposed to the solution.
And when you talk about a stigma in receiving mental health resources, that's something, especially in a town our size or smaller, either in New Mexico or like this situation that happened in Texas in the small town where Ross Elementary School is located, that's going to be something that the counselors, the therapists, and the students, the community, everyone's going to have to deal with that.
Absolutely, and we're talking about teens. There's a whole study within the criminal justice system that has to do with juvenile justice and the juvenile justice to trying to keep away from the stigma. For example, if they are arrested, we don't call that arrested for juveniles, we call that detained, because we want to make sure they don't have this stigma. So that's on the front side. And so on the back side, what they're dealing with that are so serious an issue for them as well, that it's hard to say that we can find one solution. I think we're going to have an approach. I wouldn't even say 3 or 5 prong. There's a lot more prongs to approach, and so I think we have to have a good conversation within our community and our schools to see if we can kind of think outside of the box to offer that we haven't been offering in the past.
If I think about some of these causes of violence, especially with these events that have happened just this month, especially the ones in Buffalo, New York, which appear to be racially motivated based on the information that we have, there are some differences in beliefs and perceptions, apparently between the perpetrator or alleged perpetrator in Buffalo and the neighborhood that he drove to. I think maybe there's been early exposure to violence. I don't know if that's the case in this particular instance, but that was the one when we first started talking about this conversation, and then unfortunately we had the tragedy in Texas yesterday. What do you think about those early causes of violence that someone might experience? Are there ways that we can better understand those?
Again, we're not good at diagnosing at the front end of that, and that's what we're trying to figure out, how to be able to move forward to help these kids what they need to make sure they don't make those decisions. And yes, absolutely yes. We have the, I think I've kind of summarized it up in a couple of things that we're dealing with. We're talking about societal structures. That has to do with that. We have our moral priorities that we have. You might add faith in there as well, and the way they're brought up and things of that nature. And then we have accessible resources. Those are the three things that we're having to contend with. And so when you try and each one of those prongs have 100 things that are associated with that. So how do we find that puzzle for that child in that community, in that school, in order to intervene in the best possible way?
Okay. And these actions, you mentioned morality, they do seem to go against the shared value of a given community, things like respect, safety, well-being. Has there been a deterioration in those values, do you think, over time, or are they from another era?
Probably. I think so. That's always going to be an issue. We'll talk about parents. We understand that most of our children are now raised by not their biological parents, so that might be an issue as well. The father being absent, that's always going to be an issue. And so yes, I think when we talk about simple stuff like manners and courtesy and the social norms that we follow all these years, I think we are moving into a different era. And so we're going to have to roll with the punches, as it were, to try and address those issues. But we haven't figured that out at this point in time. And so again, we're in the same position that we were before. Social issues, family, kids, communities, and have a good conversation on try and find a way to help these kids.
And you mentioned earlier having conversations in the community and across different groups, whether they're religious groups in the churches or whether they're social clubs or social groups within the community, families. How would you think about that going forward now that we're looking at all of these shootings that have occurred just in this month and over the past year or so here in the United States?
I think generally within our community, and I will assume that's other communities as well, is that all of those entities are been working autonomously on their own. So I think we need to get together. And so regardless of your faith or your politics or your position or the leadership that you're in, including our college, faculty, staff, administration, I think we all need to have that, again, that sit at the table conversation to find out what you're doing, that you are offering that maybe we're not, or maybe we can fill in the gaps to make sure we can let it be a little bit more complete idea of what we need to deliver these kids.
Well, I appreciate all of the comments. Do you have any closing thoughts today, or this afternoon rather?
I think we're trying to find an answer. That's always going to be the case. So I think we'll stick with what's been working for many, many years. Is community, understand each other, understand our community, offering the resources that we can. Stuff like training for our kids to understand the signs that might be happening in our schools, to be able to act on that as well. So it's always going to be about each other, and hopefully we can continue on, especially in a small community that we are, just talk to each other, kids, family, to make sure it happens in the best possible way.
Thank you very much for sharing that information with us today, and enjoyed this conversation. Even though it's about tragic events, it's good to talk about these things, and I think just having it in a conversational manner where we can see what issues could be resolved through conversation in the community, seeing what role the campus might have in terms of trying to resolve some of these issues on the front end, like you're saying. And so thank you again for taking time to talk with me this afternoon. And I think for now, we'll just say, be safe out there, and we'll try to do our very best to reach out to the community and to different areas of Roswell and Chavez County to ensure that we can promote safety and well-being.